For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Strat News Global, and welcome to The Gist, our signature show on foreign affairs and security. I'm Surya Gangadharan, and on The Gist this evening, I have with me from Budapest, Hungary, Professor Tamas Matura. He teaches and researches on China at the Corvinius University in Budapest. And as you're aware, we are going to talk to Dr. Matura about some of the developments in Hungary over the last week, notably the demonstrations against China, against the Fudan University campus coming up in Budapest, which appears to have galvanized a lot of anti-China sentiment in that country. So the deal with the Chinese on Fudan University is seen as lacking transparency. There are allegations about the cost involved and who's paying for it, and so on and so forth. We'll get into those details with Professor Matura. So, Professor Matura, to begin with, what's behind this love affair between Budapest and Beijing?
Hello, and thank you for having me today. Well, the Chinese-Hungarian relationship has been developing for almost 18 years, but it is indeed true that the current government since 2010 has been building it even faster, and now Hungary is one of the best friends of China in the European Union, while other countries all around the EU, including Central and Eastern Europe, have been developing some concerns about Chinese activity in the continent. The Hungarian government still sticks to its pro-China policies. And I believe that at the beginning, so in the first 5 years of this love affair, if you like, economic considerations were the most important one. However, in the last 5 years, it seems that political considerations are about to prevail, and the Hungarian government and the Prime Minister Viktor Orban himself looks at China as an important potential ally and a big brother, if you like, in his fight with the European Union.
Mm-hmm. So basically, he's opened up to China expecting investment.
Absolutely. We shouldn't forget that around 2010, when the current government came to power, the country was still experiencing the aftermath of the global financial crisis, and we were about to enter the Eurozone crisis. So it wasn't Hungary alone to look to China and to look at China as a potential new source of investment into the country and as a potential new target of Hungarian exports. All countries in the European Union have been doing the same. We shouldn't forget that German companies have been there in China since the 1980s. So Central European countries, including Hungary, try to catch up with Western Europe in terms of shaping and forging better economic relationship with China.
Okay, so tell us about this controversy over Fudan University. Just what is it about?
In 2019, the Hungarian and the Chinese leadership agreed that the very prestigious University of Fudan in Shanghai will set up a new campus in Budapest. That would be the very first foreign campus of Fudan, and even more so, the very first one in the Western world. So it is a huge undertaking. It's a huge opportunity to the Chinese university to have its own campus in the European Union, in the Schengen area, what would enable the Chinese to issue double-degree diplomas, a European and Chinese diploma at the very same time. However, there are some controversies about this issue, and some people in Hungary point at potential security concerns, also to potential ideological concerns. But I believe that the main problem is about the financial part of this whole solution, because it seems that this model will follow the model of the Belt and Road Initiative. The total cost of the university would go up to 1.8 billion euros, what is more than the total combined budget of all Hungarian universities in the country. And Hungarian taxpayers would have to pay for that, while 85% of the cost would be covered by a Chinese loan. So it seems that the Hungarian taxpayers would have to pay for the Chinese, while the Chinese would hire a Chinese company to deliver the construction itself. It seems that they would like to hire Chinese employees and to use Chinese construction material to build this enormous campus of half 500,000 square meters. And a lot of people in Hungary, especially opposition parties, pointed the fact that this doesn't seem to be the best business and the best deal from the perspective of the Hungarian nation.
And who will run this university? Is it going to be entirely Chinese funded and run?
Actually, it will be run by a Hungarian Chinese foundation, what, according to many opposition leaders, lacks transparency because the Hungarian side will have a minority in this new foundation, what would manage the campus. But at the very same time, it seems that the Hungarian government agreed to contribute financially not only to the construction itself, but also to the everyday management of the university. So it seems that another 300 million euros will be spent in the next 5-6 years on running the university, what would be an extra cost over the initial cost of the construction itself.
Is this a done deal? Is it already signed and delivered? Has construction begun?
The government has announced that they would like to get to the legal point of no return. The point is that Hungary is about to have general elections next May, so in 10 months. And it seems that the government would like to reach this point of no return, that the university would be delivered and constructed even in case the government happens to lose the elections next May. However, because of the public protest in the past few weeks and months, it seems that the government has reevaluated its position because it's realized that the opposition can gain a lot of political advantage, riding this whole huge scandal in the country. So now the government announced a few days ago that they would postpone the project beyond the elections, and they may even organize a public referendum somewhere in 2023. But of course, it's so far away, we cannot take it as granted.
Is there something larger here, perhaps a public rise in opposition to Viktor Orban? Is this what the protests against Fudan University really represent?
Yes, I think it's important to emphasize that the organizers of the protest, including the mayor of Budapest, who happens to be an opposition leader, they emphasize that the protest is not against the Chinese people. It's not against China as a nation. It is against the Chinese government's cooperation with the Hungarian government, and it's against the financial arrangement around this whole campus and the whole project. And it is also important to emphasize that the issue of Fudan managed to make China as a topic a mainstream political topic in Hungary finally. We've been in a very close contact with China for the past decade, but so far nothing has really triggered such a major public backlash against China. So this is an important development, and I believe it may have a very serious impact on the elections in Hungary.
How has Viktor Orban's performance been over the last few years? Is the economy doing well? Is unemployment under control? How is that?
Well, I think we have to take it into consideration that the current government of Viktor Orban has been very lucky over the past decade because they took over control of the country right after the financial crisis. So, the baseline was very, very low. And then in the past decade, until the hit of the coronavirus crisis, the world has been experiencing the longest economic upward trend in history. Before this decade, Hungary has never received such an enormous amount of money coming from the European Union. So economically speaking, the country has been doing very well in the past decade, but this is mostly due to very, very fortunate circumstances. Now we will have to see how the coronavirus pandemic and the economic crisis caused by the pandemic will unfold in the upcoming few months, whether the government can save itself from a failure or a defeat at the elections next year.
Professor Matura, there is a lot of speculation about Chinese investment, in your country, in Poland, other countries there. Is it as high as it is being talked about? Is the, the specter being conjured up of Chinese investment being of an ominous nature? Is this justified?
Well, that's a very important question, and thank you for raising it, because in the past 5 years, it is indeed true that we here in Central Europe have been listening to a lot of accusations coming from the West, coming from Western Europe and Washington, saying that the Central European countries have been selling the unity of the European Union in exchange of Chinese money, Chinese investment into our countries. But the reality is something very different. We just concluded a major international research focusing on the 16 Central European countries. And the reality is that the actual amount of Chinese investment, foreign direct investment in our countries is very low. In that regard, the 16+1 cooperation, the cooperation between China and the 16 Central European countries, has been a failure, and that led to major consequences. For example, that some Baltic countries, first of all Lithuania, announced that they are so disappointed by the performance of China in our region that they are about to leave the cooperation with China, and the 16+1 cooperation is in danger right now. And it is also true to Hungary, even though the Hungarian government tends to boast about the level of Chinese investment in the country. In reality, it is around 3 to 4% of the total FDI stock in the country. I wouldn't say it's irrelevant, but it is nothing compared to Western investment in Hungary.
But Hungary is also a very forthright defender of China, isn't it, in the corridors of the European Union?
Yes, it is indeed true, but we also have to employ a broader view to understand the Hungarian foreign policy towards China, because it is not only China what the Hungarian government has been supporting within the ranks of the European Union in the past few years, but the Hungarian government has been very supportive towards Turkey, Russia, the Netanyahu government of Israel, and so on and so forth. So many people in Brussels say that the Hungarian government is interested in disrupting European unity, not only about China, but in a broader view.
So, what is the image of China in Hungary? Is it, I'm talking of a public level, how are Chinese seen in Hungary?
Yes, that's another important point, that despite the pro-China policies of the Hungarian government, it is important to see that there is no social support behind that, no social support bolstering it. We just concluded another major international research a few months ago, what covered 13 European countries. And all around in Central and Eastern Europe, including Hungary, the relative or even absolute majority of the society has a very negative view of China, and only a minority of the people say that China is an important country and we have to stick to China and we have to work together with China. Even Hungarian media tends to spread quite negative news about the People's Republic.
So these negative views are in what context? Is it in the context of their authoritarian system, their business practices? What is it?
There are differences between different Central European countries. Let me point at the Czech Republic, what has always been very, very eager to talk about human rights issues and democracy. So in the Czech Republic, almost 70% of the people have a very negative view of China because they see it as a communist dictatorship. In Hungary, these value-based issues are less in the forefront of public discourse, but still, in Central Europe and in Hungary, we have bad feelings, bad connotations about communism, one-party system. And of course, there are a lot of other issues what push Hungarian public opinion towards the negative trends about China. There are some certain older misunderstandings about China. For example, the Chinese gadgets are low quality and that the Chinese are overpopulating the world. Those issues, those feelings about China are still there among the Hungarian public.
Now, I'm just wondering because we had a standoff with China over the last year. And do any of these things get reflected in the local media in your country?
A little bit, yes. Whenever there is a military standoff between China and India, for example, around the Doklam Plateau or Kashmir, of course, it hits the mainstream media in Central Europe and in Hungary as well. But I have to admit that these conflicts are not among the most important news and issues in my country and in the region. However, especially during 2020, these issues also added to the long list of negative news coming from or about China, including wolf warrior diplomacy, the source of COVID-19, China's activities in the South China Sea, or the Taiwan tension, and so on and so forth. So the clashes between India and China added to this long list of negative news about China.
And would you say that some of this is also a reflection of your own Hungary's own past, communist past?
Absolutely right. In most of the Central European countries, as I have mentioned that before, communist countries are not that popular. Surveillance state is not popular, of course. One-party system is something which most Central European people resent even today, 30 years after the change of the regime. So it does not help the soft power of China in the region.
Tell me something about Viktor Orban. Here the media coverage of much of Central and Eastern Europe is very, very limited. But we understand that he's a fairly authoritarian figure. Is that accurate?
Well, Viktor Orban himself described his system as illiberal democracy, whatever that may mean. So he says that Hungary is still a democracy, but it's not a liberal, but an illiberal democracy, but puts more emphasis on the intervention of the state, the creation of national champions, and so on and so forth. Hungary is not a dictatorship, definitely. We still have freedom of speech, as you can listen to me right now. But for example, the last elections were claimed to be still free, but not fair anymore. The media, the overwhelming majority of the media is controlled or influenced by the government. And according to certain international institutions, Hungary has been experiencing a democratic backsliding in the past 5 to 8 years. And many of these international institutions do not regard Hungary as a full-fledged democracy anymore.
I see. So the conduct of next year's elections could be very, very problematic.
Yes, indeed. And I think the government still has a very high chance to win the elections. But it is also true that in the past 12 years, this is the very first time when the opposition has some kind of chance to defeat the government and to create or to organize a new government. In that case, I think Hungary would spend a lot of years in domestic political turmoil, because even if the current government gets defeated, their power, their grip over several dimensions of the Hungarian economy would be still very, very strong, and they would do whatever they can to obstruct the next government in turning the country into another direction.
Are there concerns that perhaps China or some other country could interfere in the election process, perhaps in favor of the ruling dispensation?
I don't think that China does have the tools, the means, or the will to interfere into Hungarian domestic politics. Some other experts say that Russia might be a concern, not only in Hungary, but in other Central European countries as well, and even beyond Central Europe, in Western Europe. But let's hope for the best, that the Hungarian authorities can avoid any Russian meddling into the Hungarian elections.
I just want to come back to the question about how China is perceived. Could that perception also be driven by perhaps a certain insularity among Hungarians about foreigners, about outsiders? Could it be that? Is that an issue?
Yes, xenophobia is a problem in many Central and Eastern European countries, and it is also important to know that Hungary is a unitary country. It means that 99% of the population belongs to one single nation and one single ethnic group, Hungarians. And countries like that usually are a little bit concerned about foreigners. However, when it comes to China, it might be surprising, but the Chinese people are not hated in Hungary. And the reason for that is that in the early 1990s, around 30,000 Chinese people arrived to Hungary. There was a visa waiver program for a few years for them. And the Chinese people, the cheap Chinese products, actually helped to mitigate the downturn of the Hungarian economy during the years of transition from communism to the market economy. So a lot of Hungarian people have no problem with the Chinese people. They do have some problem, however, with the Chinese state.
What is the Chinese? How many Chinese are there actually resident in Hungary? Is it easy to get residence permits? How do they come in? Is it illegal immigration of some kind?
We have two major branches of Chinese people in Hungary. One, those who arrived in the late 1980s, early 1990s, as I mentioned. At the peak time, there were around 40,000 of them here in Hungary. It's a little bit hard to keep a track record because they can travel around Europe. Many of them may have moved to other European countries. And the other chunk of the Chinese people here is around 10 to 13,000. And they arrived in the past 5 years because the Hungarian government offered a so-called golden visa program to many foreign investors, and most of these investors were coming from China, and therefore they also settled down in Hungary. They have a permanent residency permit, but we also believe that most of them actually reside in China, or they moved to other European countries in the Schengen era. They just wanted to have a permanent residency permit in a Schengen era country, that is in Hungary.
Mm-hmm. And are attacks on Chinese common? Is there tensions at the street level?
No, not at all. There is no ethnic tension, if you like. The Chinese people are doing very well in Hungary. Actually, in the past few decades, many of them have become very rich because they are merchants. They are conducting trade between Hungary and other European countries and China. So I see a lot of very well-off Chinese people driving beautiful cars on the roads of Budapest. I don't think that there are any ethnic tensions here. Actually, Budapest is one of the very few countries in Europe that host a bilingual school, a Chinese-Hungarian bilingual school on elementary level and now on secondary school level as well. And there are a lot of Hungarian people who want to send their children over there to learn Chinese from the very beginning of their education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I look back, was there a lot of Chinese involvement with Hungary in the communist years? I mean, some kind of brotherhood of some kind?
Hungary was sailing along with the Soviet Union. So in 1949, Hungary was one of the countries to recognize the People's Republic of China in a matter of days. So in the first few days of October, right after Mao Zedong proclaimed the PRC in Beijing. However, in the 1950s and 60s, because there was the so-called Sino-Soviet split, so the relationship between the People's Republic and the Soviet Union deteriorated. Therefore, Central European countries like Hungary followed the lead of Moscow, and we also degraded relationship to the PRC, and there were no real exchanges, economic or people-to-people exchanges were all frozen. In the 1980s, the relationship got a little bit better again, but because of the change of the regime in Hungary, of course, the first freely elected democratic government of Hungary was reluctant to keep close relationship to the Chinese, and therefore in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, Hungary and China were not working together that closely until 2003, when our accession to the European Union was already signed and sealed, and the Prime Minister of the time initiated his rapprochement towards China because he realized that China was a rising power and it was in the interest of Hungary to get closer to China again.
Mm-hmm. I want to get back to question on Fudan University. And now it is ranked among the fairly high, in international rankings, perhaps higher than any Hungarian university I'm aware of. So in that sense, it may not be a bad deal, is it?
Well, yeah, I think there are at least four dimensions of this issue. The financial dimension I mentioned before, well, doesn't seem to be very fair to Hungary. There is a security dimension. Many people say that the Chinese would turn the university into a spy hub or a spy center. I think
Yeah.
these concerns are highly exaggerated. The Chinese do not need the university. Would not dare to use the university. Just imagine the enormous level of scrutiny what this university will enjoy or deserve when it opens its gates to the students. I don't think the Chinese would use it as a spy hub. The third dimension is an ideological dimension. Many opposition parties say that the Chinese would use the Fudan University in Budapest to spread Chinese communist ideology among Hungarian or European students. I think these claims are also exaggerated. The Chinese are
Yeah.
not interested in indoctrinating foreign people. They are interested in indoctrinating their own people. And once
Yeah.
again, they wouldn't dare to spread Maoism or Leninism in Central Europe, because that would lead to a boomerang effect. People would freak out, and the Western media would point at the Chinese spreading communism in Central Europe. I don't think they would do that. And the last dimension is the quality of Fudan University. On the one hand, you are right, it's an excellent university, and I think its arrival to Central Europe could contribute a lot to the development of Central European academia and education. Fudan University, based on the list you look at, but it's either the 45th or the 71st best university in the world. If it introduces, for example, technological R&D in Hungary, focusing on artificial intelligence, focusing on 5G or 6G technology, it could be very beneficial, not only to Hungary, but even beyond the whole region and the European Union. However, at the very same time, we have concerns about it, because Fudan's annual budget is bigger than the total combined budget of all Hungarian universities. There were some news and information leaked from the Ministry of Education in Hungary, and based on that, it seems that Fudan would pay $250,000 a year to its professors, what is 10 times higher than what a Hungarian professor earns.
Yeah.
So we are really afraid that Fudan would easily attract and elude professors, the best ones, and students from Hungarian universities, and that would create such an environment that could make a harm to Hungarian universities.
And is there any report put out by your security or intelligence authorities, warning against Fudan University, against the China connection?
No, not at all, but we shouldn't forget that the Hungarian counterintelligence and other secret services are controlled by the current government, so I would be surprised if
Yes.
they dared to say anything about it. And of course, we shouldn't forget that we don't know too much about the details, so this is a process in the making. Even according to the first news, the university would have opened its doors in 2024, so in 3 years. Now there might be a delay, so I think it's too early to any intelligence service to think about it. However, I also argue that it's a manageable risk. So if the Hungarian services and counterintelligence services have the political will and the tools and the means to conduct, due diligence and to track down all the incoming Chinese professors and Chinese students, that is something what they could do. We shouldn't forget that there are 400,000 Chinese students studying in the United States of America every single
Yeah.
year. So if the Americans can welcome those students, we can as well.
Yeah. Although Hungary is much smaller.
Yeah, but we will have probably maximum 4,000 to 5,000 Chinese students.
Yeah. On that note, Professor Matura, pleasure talking to you. Thank you for all that insight and that information. Sitting here in India, there's very little of Hungary or Central Europe on our radar, so we tend to miss out on some of these stories. But it was great talking to you, and thank you so very much.
It was my
And for all
pleasure.
of you out
Thank you.
there who are following us on Twitter and other social media, keep tracking us. Give us your comments, observations, criticism where required, and we're open to everything. Thank you again, and that's all for you from the Gist today.